I didn't wake up one day and decide to stop loving my family. That's the part people never understand. They imagine some big blow up, a screaming match, doors slammed, words thrown like knives. They think self respect arrives loud and dramatic. For me, it came quietly, late, and almost too late to matter. I loved my family more than myself for so long that I forgot there was supposed to be a difference. I'm telling this story now, not because I want sympathy and not because I want revenge. I'm telling it because I know there are women listening who are living inside the version of me that no longer exists. Women who are tired in a way sleep doesn't fix. Women who give and still feel like they're failing. If that's you, I want you to know how this ends. My name is Elaine. I'm 66 years old. I have 2 children, 1 ex-husband, a lifetime of memories, and a body that remembers every year I ignored myself. For most of my life, I thought love meant disappearing. I grew up watching my mother do it. She put everyone first: my father, my brother, the neighbors, the church. By the time she reached her 60s, there was almost nothing left of her except obligation and quiet resentment she never named. I promised myself I'd be different. I wasn't. I married young, 22. He was charming in that careless way men can be when someone else is holding the weight. He worked, yes, but I ran the life, the calendar, the meals, the emotions, the emergencies. When the kids came, everything narrowed. If you've been there, you know what I mean. Your world shrinks to schedules and needs and doing whatever keeps the peace. I told myself it was temporary, just a season. I told myself once the kids were older, I'd come back to myself. Years passed fast when you're not looking at yourself. I was the one who remembered birthdays, the one who packed lunches, the one who smoothed over fights and explained feelings and stayed up late worrying about everyone else's future. When my husband pulled away, emotionally first, then physically, I blamed myself. I worked harder, loved louder, made myself smaller. When he finally left, people told me how strong I was. They always do. What they don't tell you is that strength, when it's expected, becomes a cage. I raised the kids alone from their teens onward, not just financially, emotionally. I was the safety net, the therapist, the backup plan. I was proud of that. Too proud. Because when you make yourself indispensable, people stop seeing you as human. They see you as a function. I didn't notice it happening at first. It never starts cruel. It starts casual. A missed call returned late, a visit postponed. Can you help me out just this once? That becomes routine. I told myself it was normal. Kids grow up, life gets busy. That's what I said every time my chest tightened. I worked into my 60s, not because I loved my job, but because I was scared. Scared of being a burden, scared of not being useful, scared of what would happen if I finally sat still and listened to myself. My daughter called me her rock. My son said he didn't know what he'd do without me. I wore those words like proof that I mattered. What I didn't see was that they never asked how heavy the rock was getting. The first time I realized something was wrong wasn't dramatic. It was a Tuesday. I had a doctor's appointment, routine, nothing serious, but I was nervous. I called my daughter just to hear her voice. She didn't answer. I texted my son, no reply. I sat in the waiting room alone, watching younger women scroll their phones, older couples sit hand in hand. When my name was called, I felt this strange wave of sadness I couldn't explain. I drove myself home and cried in the car before going inside. Not because of the appointment, because I realized I didn't know who I could lean on anymore. Still, I said nothing. That's what women like me do. We absorb, we adjust, we make excuses for people who wouldn't make them for us. The requests kept coming. Money sometimes, time often, emotional labor always. My daughter would call upset about her marriage, talk for an hour, hang up, and not ask once how I was doing. My son would drop by when something broke, his car, his confidence, his plans, then leave as soon as it was fixed. I told myself this was motherhood, but deep down, something felt wrong. Love shouldn't feel like erosion. The moment that changed everything wasn't big, it wasn't cruel, it was quiet. It was my birthday, 65. No party, no visit, a text from my daughter late in the evening, a quick call from my son while driving. I sat alone at the kitchen table with a slice of cake I bought myself, staring at the candle, realizing no one had asked what I wanted. Not that day, not in years. That's when the thought arrived, soft, dangerous, undeniable. If I disappeared tomorrow, would anyone notice before they needed something? That thought scared me more than being alone. I started paying attention after that, really paying attention. I noticed how conversations revolved around their lives, their stress, their needs. I noticed how my stories were interrupted, redirected, forgotten. I noticed how tired I was all the time, not physically, existentially. I mentioned my exhaustion once, just once. My daughter said, "Well, everyone's tired, Mom." My son said, "You've always handled things." And that's when I understood. They weren't cruel. They were comfortable. Comfortable with my sacrifice. Comfortable with my silence. Comfortable with the version of me that never asked for anything. The version of me that existed to support, not to live. That night, I sat alone in my living room and did something I hadn't done in decades. I asked myself a dangerous question. What if I stopped? Not stopped loving, stopped disappearing. The idea terrified me because when you've built your entire identity around being needed, self-respect feels like abandonment. I didn't know yet how much resistance that change would bring. I didn't know who would stay. I didn't know who I'd lose. Only I knew this. If I didn't choose myself soon, there wouldn't be much left to choose. And that was the moment, quiet, invisible to everyone else, when the woman I had been for decades began to loosen her grip. Not out of anger, out of survival. For a long time after that birthday, I didn't do anything differently on the outside. That's another thing people misunderstand. Change doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it just sits inside you, heavy and awake, watching. I still answered the phone, still showed up when asked, still listened, still helped. But something had shifted. I stopped rushing. I stopped rearranging my entire day to accommodate everyone else's emergencies, and I started noticing how uncomfortable that made them. The first boundary I set was so small it almost felt silly. My daughter called one afternoon, her voice already tight with frustration. "Mom, can you come watch the kids tonight? I just need a break." Normally, I would have said yes without thinking, canceled my plans, which at that point were usually just me and a quiet evening, and driven across town with a smile. That day, I hesitated. "Not tonight," I said carefully. "I'm pretty worn out." There was a pause. "Oh," she said. "Okay." But her tone changed, just slightly, like disappointment mixed with irritation. "Well, I guess I'll figure something out." I sat there holding the phone after we hung up, heart racing like I'd done something wrong. That was the guilt talking. I'd trained it well. All evening I fought the urge to call back and apologize, to offer tomorrow instead, to explain myself until my need disappeared. But I didn't. And the world didn't end. That surprised me. The next boundary was harder. My son stopped by one Saturday morning. No warning, he never called ahead. He'd always said he liked knowing he could just swing by. He stood in the doorway, hands in his pockets. "Hey, Mom, you got a minute?" I already knew what that meant. "My car insurance is late. I just need help covering it this month." I looked at him, really looked at him, standing there in his work jacket, healthy, capable, used to being rescued. "I can't," I said. He blinked. "What?" "I can't help with that right now." The silence that followed was thick. "But you always," he started. "I know, but I can't." He laughed once, short and disbelieving. "Okay, wow." I waited for him to ask why. He didn't. Instead, he said, "I didn't know you were struggling." That sentence hit harder than anything else, not because it was cruel, but because it revealed the truth. He hadn't noticed me at all. "I am," I said quietly, "just not in the way you're thinking." He left shortly after that, polite, distant, confused. I closed the door and leaned against it, shaking. That was when the fear showed up. What if this costs me my children? What if love really was conditional? What if the only thing keeping us connected was my usefulness? Those questions haunted me. But another voice, older, steadier, started answering back. What if this is the only way to find out? The pushback didn't come immediately. At first, there was just space. Fewer calls, shorter conversations, a subtle cooling that felt like punishment. My daughter stopped venting to me about her marriage. My son stopped dropping by unannounced. On the surface, it looked like respect. Underneath, it felt like withdrawal. I'd lie in bed at night staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd miscalculated, wondering if I waited too long, wondering if self-respect was something you had to earn earlier in life or lose the chance forever. That's when Ellen noticed. Ellen lived 2 houses down. We'd waved at each other for years, exchanged pleasantries, nothing more. One morning, she caught me outside taking the trash out. "You okay?" she asked, eyes sharp. I shrugged. "Fine." She tilted her head. "You don't look fine." I almost laughed. Instead, I said, "I think I'm changing." She smiled, not gently, but knowingly. "About time," she said. We started walking together in the mornings after that, slow laps around the block, no pressure, just movement and conversation. I told her what was happening, about the boundaries, about the guilt. She listened without interrupting. "You know what the hardest part is?" she said finally. "When you stop over-giving, people feel like you took something from them, even though it was never theirs." That stuck with me, because that's exactly how it felt, like I'd committed a crime for keeping something for myself. The real confrontation came a few weeks later. My daughter called, her voice tight and clipped. "You've been distant." I almost laughed. "I'm still here. I'm just not doing everything anymore." She sighed. "It feels like you don't care." That sentence cracked something open. "I care," I said slowly, "just care about myself too now." Silence. Then sharp. "So what, you're choosing yourself over your family?" I closed my eyes. "I'm choosing balance." She scoffed. "That's selfish, Mom." That word used to destroy me. This time, it just sat there. "I don't agree," I said. "Well, don't be surprised if people stop showing up." The line went dead. I cried after that call, not because I regretted what I said, but because I finally understood the cost. Loving my family more than myself had been safe. It had kept me included. Choosing myself meant risking being alone. And that's when the truth became unavoidable. I had already been alone, just quietly. The silence after that was long. Weeks passed without calls. Birthdays went by with texts instead of visits. I stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes, stopped waiting. I started filling my time with things that didn't require permission. Long walks, books I'd put off for years, cooking for myself without worrying if anyone liked it. The guilt didn't vanish, but it softened. Then came the moment that tested everything. My son called late one night. "Mom," he said, voice strained, "I really need help." Old reflexes surged. "What's wrong?" I asked. He explained. Job trouble, bills, stress. "I don't know what to do," he said. "Can you help me out, just this once?" That phrase again, just this once. I took a breath. "I can listen, but I can't fix this for you." Silence. "So that's it? You're just done?" "I'm done sacrificing myself, not done loving you." He exhaled sharply. "You've changed." "Yes, I have." When the call ended, I sat there shaking, wondering if I'd just burned the last bridge. Ellen came over the next morning without knocking. "You held the line, didn't you?" she asked. I nodded, tears spilling. She sat beside me and said something I'll never forget. "Sometimes the only way people learn your value is when you stop giving discounts." That night, for the first time in decades, I slept without waiting for the phone to ring. And somewhere in that quiet, a strange thing happened. I felt stronger, not happier, not relieved, stronger. Because for the first time, my love wasn't costing me my entire self. And I knew then, truly knew, that whatever came next, I could survive it, even if it meant standing alone. There's a special kind of loneliness that comes when you realize people don't miss you. They miss what you did for them. It settles in your chest quietly, like grief that doesn't ask permission. After that call with my son, the silence didn't just stretch. It hardened. Days passed, then weeks. No updates, no just checking in, no casual texts. I told myself this was what boundaries looked like, that this was the adjustment period everyone talks about. But at night, lying in bed with the house dark and still, doubt crept in. Had I gone too far? Had I waited too long? Was self-respect something you could only afford when you were young and independent, not when your world had already narrowed? I'd spent decades teaching my children that I would always be there, no matter the cost. And now I was asking them to rewrite that understanding overnight. Of course there was resistance. Of course there was distance. Still, knowing that didn't make it hurt less. One afternoon, I went to the grocery store and ran into a woman I used to know from school pickup days. Her kids were grown too. We stood there chatting politely until she asked, "So, do you see your kids much these days?" The question caught me off guard. I smiled automatically. "They're busy." She nodded knowingly. "Aren't they all?" But then she added, "Still, they try, right?" That's when my throat tightened. I mumbled something vague and excused myself, pushing my cart down an aisle I didn't need anything from. Busy. That word again. Busy had become the excuse that swallowed everything else. I realized then how often women like me protect our children's image, even when it costs us honesty. We don't want to seem bitter. We don't want to look like failures. So we soften the truth until even we can't feel its edges anymore. That night, I called my sister. We weren't especially close, but she'd always been blunt in a way I respected. "I think my kids don't like me anymore," I said, half joking, half breaking. She didn't laugh. She said, "Do they like you or do they rely on you?" The distinction landed hard, because I wasn't sure anymore. A few days later, my daughter finally called. Her voice was polite, controlled. "Hey, Mom." "Hi," I said. There was an awkward pause. "I just wanted to check in, see how you're doing." That should have felt good. It didn't, because it felt performative. "I'm okay," I replied. She hesitated. "So, are you mad at us?" That question told me everything. They hadn't noticed my exhaustion. They hadn't noticed my loneliness. They'd only noticed the withdrawal of access. I'm not mad. I'm just tired. She exhaled sharply. Well, it feels like you're pulling away. I almost laughed. I spent years holding everything together. I'm allowed to rest now. Silence. Then she said, I guess I just didn't think you'd stop. There it was, the truth, naked and unfiltered. They never planned for a version of me with limits. They never imagined a future where I wasn't the emotional cushion under their falls. That night, I cried harder than I had in years. Not because of what she said, but because of what it meant. I had trained them out of seeing me as a whole person, and now undoing that training felt like betrayal to them. Ellen noticed the toll it was taking. You're grieving, she said one morning as we walked. Grieving what? I asked. The version of motherhood you believed in, the one where love automatically turns into care. That hit deep, because I had believed that if I gave enough, it would come back to me in my old age. That belief had kept me going through exhaustion, fear, and self-erasure. Letting go of it felt like losing religion. I had to confront a terrifying idea. What if I wasn't needed anymore? And worse, what if I never really was, not in the way I thought? I started replaying memories with new eyes, the times I rushed to fix things without being asked, the way I offered help before anyone admitted they were struggling, the times I said yes to avoid being forgotten. I'd confused being indispensable with being loved, and now that I was no longer indispensable, I was seeing the truth. My son showed up unannounced one evening. I hadn't heard from him in weeks. I opened the door and found him standing there, shoulders tense, eyes guarded. Can we talk? He asked. I stepped aside and let him in. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I helped with homework, listened to teenage heartbreaks, planned holidays. So, you really mean it, huh? He said, tapping his fingers nervously. Mean what? I asked. That you're not helping anymore. I didn't say that. I said I'm not rescuing. He frowned. Feels the same. That's because you've never had to sit with the consequences before, I said softly. He stiffened. That's not fair. I know, I replied. Neither was asking me to keep giving when I was empty. He stared at the table. I didn't realize you felt that way, he muttered. And for a moment, just a moment, I saw something shift. But then he said, I just thought you liked helping. That sentence nearly broke me, because I had. I liked being needed. I liked feeling essential. But liking something doesn't mean it's not hurting you. I liked it until it cost me myself, he said. He didn't have an answer for that. He left quietly. No argument, no resolution, just distance. After he left, I sat alone in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug gone cold, realizing something profound. Self-respect doesn't guarantee reconciliation. It doesn't promise gratitude. It doesn't even promise understanding. What it offers is something quieter and more permanent. Integrity, the ability to look at yourself without flinching. I didn't know yet if my children would ever fully understand what I was doing, but I knew I couldn't go back, because going back meant disappearing again. And I had finally, painfully learned what it cost to erase myself for love. There's a moment in every woman's life when the body speaks louder than the heart. I ignored mine for years. I'd learned how to push through fatigue, pain, dizziness, learned how to call it just getting older and keep moving. That's what women like me do. We normalize discomfort until it becomes background noise. The morning it finally caught up with me started like any other. I woke up stiff. My joints complained as I swung my legs out of bed. I stood too fast and the room tilted just for a second. I grabbed the dresser and waited for it to pass. It usually did. That day, it didn't. By the time I made it to the kitchen, my hands were shaking. I poured coffee and nearly dropped the mug. A wave of nausea rolled through me, followed by a tightness in my chest that made me stop breathing for a beat too long. I sat down slowly, heart pounding, trying not to panic. This is nothing, I told myself. You're just tired. But something felt different, heavier. I reached for my phone without thinking. My daughter's name hovered under my thumb. Then I hesitated. I pictured her distracted voice, the sigh, the "can I call you back?" I thought of my son, always rushing, always overwhelmed. For the first time in my life, I realized something chilling. I didn't know who to call. That realization hit harder than the pain. I sat there for a long moment, breathing shallow, letting the truth sink in. When you build your life around being the strong one, people forget you're allowed to be weak. I ended up calling Ellen. She answered on the second ring. "Elaine," she said, "what's wrong?" I didn't try to sound calm. "I don't feel right," I said. "Can you come over?" She was there in 10 minutes, didn't ask questions, didn't minimize, just helped me into her car and drove me to the urgent care like it was the most natural thing in the world. Sitting there in that waiting room again, fluorescent lights, stiff chairs, I felt the same sadness I'd felt months earlier. But this time it was sharper, because now I understood what it meant. Ellen sat beside me the whole time, held my coat, asked questions when my mind went blank, made sure I drank water. When the doctor said it wasn't a heart attack, just severe exhaustion, stress, and dehydration, I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt exposed, ashamed, because I knew how close I'd come to being truly alone. On the way home, Ellen said gently, "You can't keep living like you're indestructible." I stared out the window. "I don't know how to live any other way." She nodded. "Then you're going to have to learn." That night, lying in bed with my chest still tight and my thoughts racing, something cracked open. I imagined a future version of myself, older, frailer, needing help, and the image terrified me, not because of the aging, because of the isolation. I realized I'd spent so long making sure my children never had to worry about me that I'd erased myself from their concern altogether. They didn't know how to show up. They'd never had to. The next morning, my daughter called. Ellen had told her what happened. "Why didn't you call me?" she asked, voice edged with accusation. I almost laughed. "I didn't want to bother you," I said. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "You're my mother." I closed my eyes. "That's exactly why," I replied quietly. Silence stretched between us. "I didn't know you were struggling," she said finally. And there it was again, the same sentence, different voice, same truth. "I've been struggling for years. You just weren't looking." She bristled. "That's not fair." "I know, but it's real." She didn't apologize. She didn't ask what I needed. She just said, "You should have said something sooner." That's the trap, isn't it? The expectation that women must announce their breaking point before they're allowed to rest. After we hung up, I didn't cry. I felt clear about something I'd been avoiding. My children weren't bad people, but they weren't equipped to care for me the way I cared for them, and that wasn't entirely their fault. I had trained them out of it. That afternoon, I made a list. Doctor appointments I'd put off, paperwork I'd ignored, things in my house that needed fixing, people I could rely on, not emotionally in theory, but practically in reality. The list was short. Ellen's name was at the top. That should have broken my heart. Instead, it grounded me, because it forced me to accept a truth I'd been resisting. Family is not always blood. Sometimes it's the people who show up without being asked. That realization didn't erase the pain with my children, but it changed the way I carried it. I stopped waiting for them to become something they weren't ready to be, stopped hoping that one more sacrifice would wake them up. I began building a life that didn't depend on their approval. That's when the real backlash started. My son called, angry this time. "I heard you went to the hospital. Why didn't you tell me?" I didn't ask. "That's not the point," he snapped. "You make it sound like we don't care." I took a breath. "You care in theory," I said, "but caring and showing up aren't the same." "That's harsh," he said. "So was being alone when I needed help," I answered. He went quiet. "I didn't know," he said finally. "I know." And that was the problem. That conversation changed something between us. Not for the better, not yet, but it shifted the dynamic. They couldn't pretend anymore. They couldn't claim ignorance. The truth was out, uncomfortable, inconvenient, impossible to unhear. And now they had a choice. So did I. That night, sitting alone with the lights dimmed low, I realized something profound. Self-respect isn't just about saying no. It's about being honest, even when the truth disrupts the version of you people are comfortable with. And once you start telling that truth, there's no going back. After the health scare, nothing went back to the way it was. People say near misses bring families closer. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they just expose the cracks that were already there. For me, it did the latter. My children checked in more, briefly. A few extra texts, a couple of rushed calls, concern that hovered on the surface but never quite sank in. It felt like maintenance, like they were doing just enough to reassure themselves they weren't terrible people. And I understood that instinct because I'd lived my whole life cushioning theirs. But I didn't want maintenance anymore. I wanted presence. One Sunday afternoon, my daughter asked if we could have lunch, just the two of us. I said yes. I drove to the restaurant early and sat there watching people come and go. Mothers with young kids, older couples splitting a sandwich, a woman sitting alone scrolling her phone. I wondered which one I looked like now. When my daughter arrived, she hugged me quickly and slid into the seat across from me. We talked about neutral things at first: work, traffic, the weather. Then she leaned back and crossed her arms. "You've really changed," she said. I didn't flinch this time. "I had to," I replied. She shook her head. "I just don't understand why everything feels so tense now." I took a sip of water and chose my words carefully. "Because I stopped absorbing everything," I said, "and now you can feel the weight." She frowned. "That makes it sound like we were doing something wrong." "You weren't trying to," I said, "but yes, you were." That landed hard. She looked down at the table. "I thought you liked being needed." "I did," I said honestly, until I realized being needed wasn't the same as being loved. Her eyes filled slightly. "That's not fair." "I know," I said again, "but fairness isn't the point. Reality is." She was quiet for a long time. Then she said something that cut deeper than I expected. "I guess I just assumed you'd always be okay." There it was, the core belief. I nodded slowly. "Yes, I know." She looked up at me, confusion flickering across her face. You know? Yes, I said. You assumed it because I made it look that way, because I never let you see me struggle. She swallowed. I didn't realize how alone you were. I wanted to believe that, but something in me had changed. I was alone long before I stopped helping, I said gently. The rest of lunch passed quietly. Not hostile, just heavy. When we hugged goodbye, it felt tentative, like two people relearning the shape of each other. Driving home, I cried. Not because it went badly, but because it went honestly. Honesty hurts when it arrives late. My son wasn't as receptive. When we spoke a few days later, he was defensive from the start. So now you're saying we failed you? He snapped. I'm saying I failed myself, too, by not asking for more. That's not on us, he said. I know, but the impact still exists. He scoffed. Feels like you're rewriting history. I shook my head even though he couldn't see me. I'm finally reading it. He didn't like that. He accused me of guilt tripping, of being dramatic, of making things harder than they needed to be. And for the first time in my life, I didn't rush to soften it. I'm not asking you to fix anything. I'm asking you to see me. That's vague, he said. It's not. It's just uncomfortable. That conversation ended poorly. He didn't call again for weeks, and something in me finally settled. I stopped waiting for apologies that might never come, stopped rehearsing conversations in my head, stopped imagining future versions of them who suddenly understood. Instead, I turned my attention inward. I started therapy, something I'd always dismissed as indulgent. In the first session, the therapist asked, "What do you want?" The question stunned me. "I don't know," I said. She smiled gently. "That's okay. We'll start there." Week by week, I learned to sit with discomfort instead of fixing it, to name my needs without apologizing, to recognize how deeply I'd tied my worth to my usefulness. One session, she said something that changed everything. Self-sacrifice becomes toxic when it's the only way you know how to love. That sentence hit like a bell because it explained my entire life. I'd loved my family fiercely, but I'd loved myself conditionally. Only when I was giving, only when I was needed, only when I wasn't inconvenient. Letting go of that pattern felt like withdrawal, raw, shaky, necessary. The next family gathering made everything clear. It was my granddaughter's birthday. I almost didn't go, but I did. I showed up on time, with a gift, with warmth. And when conversations turned stressful, I didn't step in to manage them. When someone asked me for help, I didn't automatically say yes. When it was time to leave, I left. No guilt, no explanation. Driving home, I felt something unfamiliar. Peace. Not happiness, not closure. Peace. Because for the first time, I wasn't trying to earn my place. I was just occupying it. That night, I stood in my kitchen and realized something that made me laugh softly through tears. I loved my family deeply. I always would. But loving them more than myself had nearly erased me. And now, loving myself didn't mean loving them less. It meant loving honestly, even if that cost me closeness, even if it changed the relationship forever. Because the version of me that disappeared quietly for decades, she was gone, and I wasn't going to resurrect her just to make everyone else comfortable. By the time summer rolled in, the shape of my life had changed so quietly that I almost didn't notice it happening. There were fewer calls, fewer expectations, fewer moments where my phone buzzed and my chest tightened, bracing for whatever problem I'd be asked to solve next. At first, that silence felt like punishment. I'd catch myself glancing at my phone, wondering if I'd gone too far, if drawing boundaries had cost me more than it gave me. But then I'd notice something else. I was breathing easier. Mornings no longer started with dread. I wasn't waking up already tired from anticipating other people's needs. I made coffee slowly, sat by the window, let the day come to me instead of chasing it. That was new, and strangely, it felt wrong. Women like me aren't taught how to rest without guilt. We're taught that rest must be earned, and usually at the expense of ourselves. So when my life grew quieter, I had to unlearn the instinct to fill it with obligation. The real test came when my son showed up unannounced one afternoon. I was in the middle of folding laundry when I heard the knock. 3 sharp raps. Familiar. Assertive. I opened the door, and there he was. Older than I remembered, tired around the eyes, still standing like someone who expected to be let in without question. "Hey," he said, stepping forward. I didn't move. "Hey," I replied. He hesitated, clearly thrown off. "Can I come in?" There it was, that small moment where everything had changed. "Yes," I said finally, stepping aside. "For a bit." We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd packed lunches, paid bills, and quietly fallen apart more times than I could count. He didn't waste time. "I'm struggling," he said. I nodded. "I know." That surprised him. "You do?" "Yes," I said. "You've always struggled. I just used to fix it for you." His jaw tightened. "I'm not asking for money," he said quickly. I believed him, but I also knew that wasn't the point. "I'm asking why everything feels different now, why you feel distant." I took a breath. "Because I stopped pretending I was okay when I wasn't, and because I stopped rescuing you from the consequences of your own life." "That feels harsh," he said. "It is," I replied, "but it's also honest." He leaned back in his chair, frustration creeping into his voice. "You used to be someone I could rely on." I met his eyes. "I still am. Just not in ways that cost me my dignity." That word landed between us like a brick. Dignity. He looked away. "I didn't know you felt like that," he muttered. I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was tragic. I didn't know either. Not until it was almost gone. He stayed for another half hour. We talked carefully, circled around old habits, stepped on emotional landmines without quite setting them off. When he left, he hugged me, awkward, stiff, unfamiliar, but real. After the door closed, I sat down and cried. Not because it hurt, because it didn't hurt the way it used to, and that told me everything. Over the next few months, my relationships shifted into something smaller, sharper, and more honest. I wasn't invited into every detail of their lives anymore, but when they did show up, it wasn't to take, it was to talk. That was the difference. Still, not everyone adjusted. One family member stopped calling altogether. Another accused me indirectly of becoming cold. I let that accusation sit without defending myself, because people often mistake boundaries for cruelty when they've benefited from your silence. I spent more time with myself, more time noticing how often I'd overridden my own discomfort in the past just to keep the peace, and once you see that pattern, you can't unsee it. One evening, I pulled out old journals I'd kept in my 40s and 50s, page after page of exhaustion, lists of things I needed to do for others, very few mentions of myself. I closed the book and whispered aloud, "No wonder you disappeared." And for the first time, I felt compassion for the woman I used to be, instead of resentment. She wasn't weak. She was taught to love that way. The late arrival of self-respect didn't erase the years I gave, but it reframed them. I hadn't failed. I had survived. And now I was learning to live. Not loudly, not dramatically, but deliberately. I took myself out to lunch one day, something I'd never done without guilt. Sat alone, ate slowly, watched people move through their lives. No one stared. The world didn't collapse. I realized then how many rules I'd followed that no one had actually written. Rules about being available, about being agreeable, about being last, and how freeing it felt to break them quietly. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about the title I might have given my life once. She gave everything. Now I'd choose something different. She finally kept something for herself. And that, at this stage of life, felt revolutionary. There's a strange moment that comes after you stop overgiving. It's not relief. It's not confidence. It's a kind of standing still, like you're waiting to see if the ground is actually solid beneath your feet or if it's about to give way. That's where I lived for a while. I wasn't scrambling anymore. I wasn't apologizing for existing. I wasn't bending myself into smaller shapes just to fit into other people's expectations. But I wasn't fully comfortable either. Because for decades, love in my life had always come with instructions. Be available, be patient, be forgiving, be quiet when it hurts. And suddenly, love wasn't asking anything from me. That silence was unsettling. I realized how deeply I'd been conditioned to believe that if I wasn't useful, I wasn't lovable. So when the request stopped, I had to face a terrifying question. If no one needs me right now, who am I? That question haunted my mornings. I'd wake up and sit on the edge of the bed, listening to the house breathe, the creak of wood, the hum of distant traffic, the soft ticking of the clock. No urgency, no crisis, just time. And time, when you've spent your life giving it away, can feel like an enemy. One afternoon, my daughter called. Not with a problem, not with an emergency, just a call. It startled me so much I let it ring twice before answering. "Hey," she said, "I was thinking about you." I closed my eyes. "Hi," I said. "That's nice to hear." She hesitated. "You sound different." "I feel different." There was a pause. Then she asked carefully, "Are you okay?" I thought about that. Not the automatic "I'm fine," not the polite version, the real one. "Yes," I said slowly. "I think I finally am." She didn't know what to do with that answer. We talked for a few minutes. Nothing heavy, nothing deep. But when we hung up, something clicked. For the first time, I didn't replay the conversation wondering if I'd said too much or too little. I didn't feel drained. I didn't feel like I'd failed a test. I just felt present. And that's when it hit me. Love feels completely different when it doesn't require you to disappear. That realization changed how I showed up everywhere. At family gatherings, I no longer scanned the room looking for ways to help. I didn't jump up when dishes piled up. I didn't take responsibility for everyone's mood. I stayed seated, listened, spoke when I had something to say, left when I was tired. Some people noticed. Some didn't like it. An aunt pulled me aside once and whispered, "You've gotten very independent." I smiled. I've always been independent. I just stopped hiding it behind exhaustion. She didn't reply, but I didn't need her to. The biggest shift happened inside me. I stopped explaining myself, stopped justifying my boundaries, stopped saying sorry for needing space, rest, or respect. And something unexpected happened. The people who stayed differently. They listened more. They asked instead of assumed. They showed up without needing something in return. And the ones who drifted, I left them. That was the hardest lesson. Understanding that not everyone is meant to walk with you into your healed life. Some people only know how to love the version of you that overextends, and when that version disappears, they don't know how to connect anymore. That doesn't make you cruel. It makes you honest. One night, sitting alone with a cup of tea, I thought about all the years I'd spent believing self-respect would cost me love. The truth was quieter. Self-respect didn't cost me love. It filtered it. What remained wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic, but it was real. And real at this age is everything. I don't know how much time I have left. None of us do. But I know this. I refuse to spend the rest of my life auditioning for my place in it. I loved my family more than myself for decades. That love was real. That sacrifice was real. But now, finally, love doesn't require me to vanish. And that changes everything. The hardest part of changing wasn't saying no. It was sitting with the guilt afterward and not running back to erase it. Because guilt has a voice, and for women like me, that voice sounds familiar. It sounds like responsibility, like love, like fear dressed up as duty. It whispers things like, "You're being selfish, you're hurting them, you're abandoning your role." And for a while, that voice almost won. The moment came on a rainy Thursday afternoon. My phone buzzed while I was standing at the kitchen sink, watching water streak down the window. My son's name lit up the screen. I felt it instantly, that old pull in my chest. I answered. "Mom," he said, breath tight, "I'm in a bind." There it was. No greeting, no check-in, just need. "I'm listening," I said carefully. He explained the situation: money, timing, stress. The details blurred together because I'd heard variations of this story my entire life. "I just need help getting through this month," he said. "I wouldn't ask if I had another option." I closed my eyes. Every instinct screamed at me to step in, to rescue, to make it go away. That instinct had been my identity for decades. But another thought rose up, quieter, steadier. If I fix this, nothing changes. So I asked a question I'd never asked before. "What's your plan if I don't?" Silence. Long, uncomfortable silence. I don't know," he admitted. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. "That's the part you need to figure out, not me." His voice hardened. "So you're really doing this?" "Yes," I said. "I am." "You know this hurts," he snapped. "I know," I replied. "It hurts me too." He hung up. I stood there shaking, not because I doubted my choice, but because choosing myself still felt like breaking a rule I'd lived by my whole life. That night, the guilt hit hard. I replayed every sacrifice I'd ever made, every late night, every bill I paid instead of resting, every time I'd put myself last because I believed that's what love demanded. I almost called him back, almost apologized, almost offered help just this once. But then something else happened. I imagined myself 5 years from now, still exhausted, still anxious, still waiting. And I realized something that finally stopped me cold. If I went back now, I'd be choosing comfort over truth. and comfort had already cost me decades. The next day, I went for a long walk, not to clear my head, to face it. I walked past houses filled with lives I didn't know, children playing, couples arguing, people just living. And I understood something painful but freeing. Everyone else was allowed to grow. I'd just never given myself permission. That evening, my daughter called. "I heard about Daniel," she said carefully. I braced myself. "I don't agree with what you did, but I kind of get it." That surprised me. I never realized how much pressure you carried. I guess I just assumed you were fine. There it was again. Assumed. "I wasn't," I said softly. "I just didn't want to burden you." She was quiet. "I don't want you to disappear." "I'm not disappearing. I'm just finally visible to myself." We didn't fix everything in that conversation, but something shifted, and that was enough. Later that night, sitting alone in my living room, I looked around and noticed something that stopped me in my tracks. The house didn't feel empty, it felt calm. For the first time, my peace wasn't dependent on being needed. It was coming from being whole. I realized then that loving your family doesn't mean sacrificing yourself forever. It means teaching them how to love you back, even if that lesson comes late. And yes, some people will resist that lesson. Some will walk away. But the ones who stay, they meet you differently. Honestly, I don't know how my story will end. I don't know if every relationship will heal. But I know this. I won't go back to being invisible just to be included. That version of me gave everything. This version finally keeps something. By the time you reach this stage of life, you stop believing in clean endings. Things don't wrap up with apologies and hugs and perfect understanding. They just settle. That's what happened next. Weeks passed after that call with my son. Not silent weeks, just quieter ones. The phone still rang, texts still came, but something had changed in the space between us. They didn't call as quickly. They didn't ask as confidently, and I didn't rush anymore. At first, that felt strange, like standing still on a moving walkway. I kept expecting the old panic to kick in, the need to fix, soothe, offer something. It didn't. What I felt instead was grief. Not the sharp, sudden kind, the slow one. The kind that creeps up on you while you're folding laundry or standing in line at the grocery store. The kind that says, "This isn't how you imagined it would be." I grieved the family I thought I was building. The idea that all those sacrifices would one day come back as care, as gratitude, as someone saying, "Mom, you did enough." That moment never came, and accepting that hurt more than any argument ever could. One afternoon, my daughter stopped by unannounced. No crisis, no story, just her. She stood in the doorway awkwardly, like she wasn't sure if she was welcome. "I was nearby," she said. I nodded and stepped aside. She sat at the kitchen table, hands wrapped around her mug like she needed something warm to hold on to. "You seem different," she said finally. I smiled a little. "I feel different." She hesitated. "I don't know how to talk to you now." That was honest. "I'm still me. I just don't disappear anymore." She looked down at the table. "I guess I didn't realize how much you did for us." I didn't correct her. Didn't say everything. Some realizations need room to breathe. We talked quietly, carefully, like two people learning a new language. There were no big apologies, no dramatic tears, just small acknowledgments. "I thought you liked taking care of things," she said at one point. "I did, until it became the only way anyone saw me." That landed. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I don't want to lose you. I squeezed back. You won't, but you'll have to meet me where I am now. She nodded. And that was it. Not closure, but progress. Later that night, alone again, I sat in my living room and let myself feel the rest of it. The disappointment, the relief, the strange mix of sadness and pride that comes when you realize you outgrew a role you once thought defined you. I thought about how many women my age are still waiting for calls, waiting for recognition, waiting for permission to rest. And I wished I could sit across from each of them and say this: you don't have to wait anymore. Your worth isn't tied to how much you give. Love that requires self-erasure isn't love, it's habit, and habits can be broken. Some relationships may never become what you hoped. Some people may never fully see what you gave. But that doesn't mean it was meaningless. It means it shaped you. And now you get to shape what comes next. I still love my family. That didn't disappear when I chose myself. But now, love doesn't cost my peace. And that's a trade I'll never regret. I used to think the hardest part of loving my family was giving everything. I was wrong. The hardest part was stopping. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally did. By the time you reach my age, you understand that life doesn't hand you a clear finish line. There's no moment where someone taps you on the shoulder and says, "You're done now. You can rest." You have to choose it. And choosing yourself, especially after decades of putting everyone else first, feels unnatural, like walking against the current after spending your whole life floating with it. In the months after things changed, I noticed something small but important. I stopped explaining myself. I didn't justify why I couldn't help, didn't soften my words, didn't pad my boundaries with guilt. I just lived. Some days were quiet in a good way. Other days were quiet in a way that still stung. Healing isn't clean. It comes in waves. One morning I'd feel peaceful making breakfast just for myself, enjoying the silence instead of fearing it. The next day I'd hear a mother on the phone with her grown child at the grocery store and feel that familiar ache rise up in my chest. Both things can be true. I learned that loving yourself doesn't mean you stop missing what could have been. It means you stop letting that longing run your life. My children didn't suddenly become different people. They still struggled, still reached out awkwardly, still didn't always know how to show care without expectation. But the dynamic shifted. They started asking before assuming, pausing before demanding, listening even if they didn't fully understand yet. And I learned something important. Respect doesn't arrive all at once. It arrives slowly when you stop negotiating your worth. I spent years believing that being a good mother meant being endlessly available. Now I understand something else. Being a good mother also means modeling self-respect, even when it's uncomfortable for others, especially then. There were moments I questioned myself. Late at night, alone, wondering if I'd gone too far. That's when I'd remind myself, I didn't stop loving them. I stopped disappearing. There's a difference. Today, my life looks smaller from the outside. Fewer visits, fewer calls, fewer obligations pulling me in every direction. But inside, it's fuller. I read more. I rest without guilt. I sit with my thoughts instead of running from them. I laugh, real laughter, not the tired kind meant to keep peace. And when my children do come by now, it's different. They see me, not just what I can do, not just what I can give, but who I am. A woman who lived, a woman who endured, a woman who finally chose herself without apology. If you're listening to this and you feel that familiar heaviness, if you are the one who always gives, always shows up, always fixes what others break, Please hear me. You are allowed to stop shrinking. You are allowed to age with dignity, to rest without earning it, to say no without explaining, to love without sacrificing your soul. Self-respect doesn't erase love. It protects it. I loved my family more than myself for most of my life, but choosing myself didn't make me cold. It made me whole.